Hello, Dog Nation. Welcome to Cover 4 Live. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have not all four of us here tonight. Mike Griffith taking some much-needed time off, but looking forward to speaking to Connor Riley, who I'm being told is to my left. Up here in the top box, Jeff Sintel is right over here. I think I did that right. We kind of had this practice before the show began. Maybe I did not quite do that correctly. Nonetheless, no matter which box I'm pointing to, a lot of chances for us to talk Georgia football and specifically some of the big comings and goings now that the 2021 cycle has officially come to an end, and now that the 2022 cycle has really hit the ground running in very aggressive fashion. We'll talk a lot about that. Guys, let's begin, though, with what came to an end yesterday. Quiet conclusion to the 2021 class for Georgia. But as Kirby Smart said when he spoke to reporters yesterday, the real work for all of this was done leading in December anyway. So lots of big hits for this group here for the 2021 cycle, probably a few misses as well. And if you don't mind, let's start positively on this because there is certainly plenty to be positive about. And I'm going to kind of make this a little more interesting in that if I ask you who the biggest hit was in Georgia's class, it might be easy to say Brock Vandegrift, or certainly it'd be easy to say Amarius Mims, who's, you know, one of the truly elite prospects I think that Georgia has signed in recent years. It'd be easy to mention one of those names. So let's try to dig a little deeper than just Vandegrift and Mims. Not to say that you can't mention them, but I do think it's interesting to bring some other names into the forefront of the conversation. So with Jeff and that in mind, you know, who does come top of mind for you?
So, hey, Brandon, hey, everybody, good night, good evening. Hope everybody's having fun on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, whatever's joining in right now. Brandon.
I don't believe we're on Twitch on this one yet. Twitch is only a Dog Nation Daily Frontier just for now.
Oh, that's only for the favorite show of Dog Nation. That's what that is. So, pardon me to plug myself and plug some Dog Nation content, but I've spent the bulk of my day today. I've tried to put together a Wikipedia page, not a real Wikipedia page on Wikipedia, but like a really like A to Z of the Georgia recruiting class. And I like your question, Brandon. And I think I would say the biggest hit, because I start thinking about guys that can play early, guys that they don't have an equal on the Georgia roster right now that they can do what they do. And I'm going to not bore everybody with preferred walk-ons, although that is very interesting in the Georgia class right now, in the 2021 class. But I think for me, I've got two ways to answer that question. First way, Brock Bowers. I think he's the guy that offensively is the first guy to get on the field. The other thing that comes to mind when you ask me that question, Brandon, and let me try and look down like Brady Bunch style here, is I think the guy that needs to be the biggest hit is got to be Nyland Green, considering Dejon Nugget Warren didn't end up in the class. Terrion Arnold didn't end up in the class. Gosh, folks, there was a time when we all thought both of those dudes were going to be in the class. Nyland Green, maybe he's got some undue burdens on his shoulders, but he really has to play well. He has to flash. He has to play extremely well. He has to get on the field and do big things. He has to play like that 5-star ranking, number 2 corner in the country that 24/7 Sports gave him.
I think that's really interesting. And Connor, I want to hear your names, but I do want you to react to something that Jeff said a moment ago, because I think it's very important to point out that there's this attempt to kind of rush to someone like Brock Bowers. I'm not saying Jeff did this. In fact, I'm saying Jeff's not doing this. But there's an attempt to rush to someone like Brock Bowers and say, oh, this is the tight end that Georgia really needs. This is the tight end that's going to do big things, as a way of kind of, you know, pumping the tires of Georgia fans who were disappointed that Rick Gilbert, you know, chose Florida over Georgia. Listen, my attitude about this is well documented. I really wanted Georgia to get a Rick Gilbert. I think he is a extraordinarily fascinating prospect. But I do think that Jeff is accurate in bringing up Bowers, in that when it comes to someone who enters the Georgia class with, I think, some real pass-catching skills. This is a guy who I think knows how to be a target. Doesn't necessarily have to be taught that. He has to learn how to play in the SEC level, of course. But when it comes to some of the polish, the sharpness that you associate with someone who's, you know, going to play that modern tight end position, I don't think it's a stretch to say that Bowers could be someone that earns himself a lot of fans very quickly.
Yeah, and Bowers is someone who he's coming to campus already. He's earned a lot of early praise from Kirby Smart, and he's, I think, more tepid now to give some of that out, but he is turning heads, I would so to speak, among the guys already there. And one interesting thing there that I'm really interested to watch with his development, especially this spring, is I think off the top of my head, he's the only player in this class that did not play a football season this past fall. He's out from California, Napa. They did not have their season this year. I'm going to be really interested to see how he sort of adjusts and where he is at in terms of his football development, losing that big year, that senior year of high school, because what we know from Kirby Smart and the way they evaluate prospects, that senior year is huge, and you usually see guys take a big step there. You look, Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins on the defensive line made a huge leap in his senior year at South Carolina. So I think Bowers and Green are the two obvious answers there. They are the two that are most likely to play right away, I think. In talking about Bowers a little bit, if you think of the Georgia offense as a meal and what you have on the table, Bowers is something Georgia that isn't quite there on the table. Yes, Darnell Washington and John Fitzpatrick as well as sort of those big physical tight end mismatches. Bowers is more that athletic type, that guy that can get in and out of routes a little bit quicker. And so I think that's something that he would really bring to the offense. Obviously, defensive back is the biggest need right now. They're probably going to go in the transfer portal to grab somebody from there to help out at cornerback. And Green's going to have to at least contend for a starting spot or push for one just to get on the field. And if I could take a long-term answer, because those are the two most obvious, give me Dylan Fairchild,
okay.
State champion wrestler, and that's something as an offensive lineman, I think that's a real benefit and value. And he's not going to be a tackle. Looking at this kid, he is straight up going to be a guard. He knows what he's going to be. He's not going to be moving around positions a whole lot. And I think there's some value where year one, he's not going to play right away, but year two, year three, I think he's somebody who can develop because of that athleticism into a really nice piece on the offensive line for Georgia.
There's a concept in gambling, sports gambling, called ride the steam. When you see a line moving aggressively very fast, sometimes some people would say you should consult your own experts for this. This is for entertainment purposes only. But some people would say that you should ride that steam, not ask questions about why it's happening, that wisdom of crowds moving a line that much. Maybe it's worth hitching your wagon to that. This is kind of a cumbersome analogy, but I do think there's something to be said for Dylan Fairchild, much that same way. Around the time that we did our show and he announced his commitment, I feel like there was so much steam behind Dylan Fairchild where everyone was acquainting themselves with, this isn't just a player that has a chance to play at the SEC level. No, this is a very, special prospect that everyone's really going to want. I think there was a time in which Fairchild had a lot of steam attached to his name. Now we just kind of know him as a Georgia commit right there alongside everybody else. But there was a real bullet next to his name for a while. And I think much the same way you might say ride the steam in gambling, I think there's something to be said about just sort of riding the steam with Fairchild. Anyone who climbed the rankings as fast as he did had to have some juice behind it.
Yeah, and, you pointed out with Terry and Arnold the other day, and it's not just Arnold, but a lot of uncommitted recruits, they seem to sort of rise up the recruiting rankings. You wonder if Fairchild had remained uncommitted a little bit longer, if he had dragged out his recruiting process, where would he be in the top 100? He's currently, I think, right around 97 right now. But he's, I think, a very good player, played at West Forsyth High School. And again, I think that wrestling background is huge. That allows him to move around, win in tight spaces. And I think that's something that's really going to help him out as he transitions to the SEC level.
So, Jeff, my name is a little bit like what, at least the theme of kind of riding the steam. I'm going to talk about Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins for a minute, who I also think really seems to be coming into his own as a prospect here near the end of the recruiting process, getting, a little bit of love from some of the analysts. And I think this is an important prospect for Georgia. I like, those defensive linemen. I think that's always important to be adding as many of those as you can. I'm going to talk a lot more about Trey Scott on the show before it's done today. But, Jeff, I think that TID is one of those guys that does not need to get lost in the shuffle of who we talk about for Georgia. Now, listen, there's a lot of other guys we could talk about. Maybe I'm intentionally trying to find someone who's, maybe a little, less discussed. But I think there's a really good chance that Ingram-Dawkins could be just as well known as many of these guys by the time they have a chance to start making a name for themselves on the field.
Hey, and Connor, you can be the budsman for this. I think Brandon sank the 12-foot putt there on his Tyrion's first name. Did he get that right? Tyrion?
I believe he did. I
think he did. It's funny, I've tried to got like one little quip. Look for this probably tomorrow, guys. I'm going to actually try to be a dad tonight and see my kids for the first time in about 7 days. But
monster.
I think Brendan, he's the most contested recruitment of the class. I think I can start, shelling out a little bit of, behind the scenes on this class. I think Tyrion tried to commit to other schools and some schools about 2 or 3 times, at least 2 times. and he kept getting pushed off. And that was Tennessee, that was North Carolina, South Carolina, and it was a very one of those very contested recruitments. And the one reason that sticks out to me is Dawkins. That juice better be worth the squeeze. Is Brennan? You don't like when I sit here and do the autopsy of Georgia's recruitments in the Carolinas for defensive linemen over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, you got Rick Sandage at Carolina, you got Zach Pickens at Carolina, you got Jordan Birch at Carolina. So, man, maybe Will Muschamp was doing something good there during his time in the Palmetto State, besides collecting a major tax bracket check. But you look at all that stuff, and I mean, Brennan, here's what's happening, and this is a prologue to your Trey Scott appreciation soliloquy that's coming on down the pipe in the show. But
which I'm talking about, I was through the door on that one. The whole internet now is in love with Trey Scott. I was first guy through the door on that years ago.
Okay, what was your love at first sight with Trey Scott? What was the first one that you can't say Jordan Davis, because you didn't really know Jordan Davis until he got on the field and started mauling folks in week 6 of the 2018 season. But
no, but it was around that time though when David. I don't want to steal the top. I don't want to steal the thunder from the topic nor get us off that. But it was around that time when you saw players developing and 2019 guys falling into the fold. It was around that time when I think Trey Scott started showing what he was all about. But we'll go back to TID for a moment here.
Can I push back a second? Now we're gonna hit all the high notes on the greatest hits catalog. We're gonna hit all the high notes on Trey Scott, but that 2019 class, Brandon, we still need to see a little bit more out of that 2019 class. That's Tramel Walthar, that's Timon Mitchell, that's Bill Norton, that's Zion Logue. That's
Logue
even a little bit.
Bad. Logue didn't play bad last year.
He did not. But that almost is a missing man formation when you take out Trayvon Walker right now in that class.
Well, let's finish this one. We'll move on to that one. And this is sort of accidentally turned into an unsung hero of the 2021 class, which was not necessarily my intention. But I do think it's worth mentioning another name here, because one of you said this a moment ago that the lack of recruiting drama hurts some guys in terms of their perception. I know this guy's a little banged up right now, but I would tout Micah Morris here a little bit. Playing at one of the top programs in the state of Georgia, committed back during just the absolute depths of the lockdown back when there wasn't much going on, and really good player, very little drama, not the kind of guy that's just generating much fanfare at all. But my gosh, and either one of you can answer this. I guess, Connor, you can. I think that Micah Morris is another one of those guys that Georgia's going to be really, really glad to have here at some point.
Yeah, this offensive line class, I think, is the strength of this signing class for Georgia. They have 3 top 100 guys in Morris, Mims, and Fairchild. They bring in Jared Wilson as well, who Sam Pittman loved and wanted in North Carolina. I believe may have had committed at one point. So that should tell you a lot about the prospect of him there. I will say, if I could throw one other name out there, Jamon Dumas-Johnson, a guy who committed back over July. Jeff was actually on vacation when it happened, the annual Jeff vacation commitment there. I think he's a guy, he reminds me a little bit of Monty Rice. Played at St. Francis Academy in Baltimore, one of the best programs in the country. And I think he's someone who, his game's not flashy. He's not the athlete that Shamel Munden is. But in terms of being a raw football player and what you bring to the table there, I think that's really important at a position like linebacker. It's either you have it or you don't. And this guy absolutely has it. So I think similarly, the unsung hero type guys, I think Jamon Dumas-Johnson fits that T as well.
Go ahead, Jeff.
So here's my just you wait. Just you wait, folks. JDJ, that's another guy that didn't get a senior football season as well. We got to condense him, Brendan. We got to save all this airtime, JDJ, TID. Sure. But he's a guy that I'm gonna bet you Coca-Cola on this. I sound like I listen to my papa talk about anything on the back porch, but I want to bet you Coca-Cola that he plays before Shmuel Munden and also Xavier Sori. And I got to throw another name on the Barbie right here. The other name, and it's kind of an extension of the Nyland Green type stuff. Kamari Lassiter. He's a guy that's not there yet. He's a guy, Brandon. This is very unusual. And I'm trying not to give away some of my best stories. It's going to be in the story tomorrow on Dog Nation. But Kamari Lassiter somehow found a way to rise up 200 points in a COVID pandemic year when that was just straight, pure game film, homie. That's all that was. And he went from a 400 level prospect to a 240 level prospect. He's a guy that you can call it Georgia pulled at least something out of Tuscaloosa in the last 3 years. They pulled him out of Tuscaloosa. He's a Savannah native. And that's another guy that I think can shine in a lot of variety of positions for Georgia.
So if we're going to do the hits, we're contractually obligated to also do the misses. And you guys can tell me, but there's no bigger miss for this 2021 class than what happens in the defensive secondary, both for how it ends when it comes to Terry and Arnold, but also if you want to go back near the beginning of this cycle, or at least many, many months ago into the cycle when Tony Grimes chose North Carolina, reclassified. There have been some high-profile misses within this defensive back recruitment for the 2021 class at a position that we knew going into the cycle that Georgia was going to need some guys. Not to say they didn't get them. Jeff's mentioned at least two of them so far during our show tonight. But there are some really big names that were kind of seemingly almost on the hook at one point in time who seemed to wriggle away at the last moment. And when you think about what Georgia didn't get, that's pretty top of mind for me.
Yeah, I think there's an alternate universe out there where they get a Tony Grimes, they get a Terry and Arnold, they get a James Williams to go along with, David Daniel and Nyland Green as well. And, really a lot of those are just straight up COVID casualties. I think I have Grimes and Williams certainly are. Williams wanted to play closer to home in Miami, and Grimes wanted to play sooner, literally reclassified, played quite a bit for North Carolina this past year. I think if you give me a magic wand and I can put any one player in this class, I think it's between either Tony Grimes or Barrett Carter, the linebacker who's headed to Clemson. I know Georgia signed Wallace there, but I still think Barrett Carter is the best linebacker in this class. So this defensive class, as good as it is, personally speaking, and I'm one of those people where if I'm throwing a party or something and I invite people, I'm one of those just messed up individuals that thinks, okay, who's not here? Who said they were going to be here and didn't show up, instead of enjoying the people who actually are here? As great as this defensive class is, and that was where this class is really going to have to sign heavy this year, I look at some of the misses they had and just wonder how much better this class could have been for Georgia.
Jeff, how about your thought on the misses for the class?
Well, first of all, Brandon, it's a long and winding road. You remember, it's funny, I went and looked back at a story Connor did, and maybe he's got one coming down the pipe. I don't want to get him ahead of his skis, but like he did 21 names to know for the 2021 class, and I'm sure he consulted a lot of my reporting or our hedges or whatever. And Georgia ended up with, I think, 8 of those names. But their names, like, remember Mario Williams, Brandon? Yeah. That was speedy slot receiver. He ends up at Oklahoma, which shows Georgia was on the right trail there. Georgia, I mean, give them credit, man. They're trying. I mean, every year in and year out, they're offering more wide receivers than Brandon takes trips to Waffle House in a normal college football season. And they're trying, but like, Mario Williams is a name, but like Connor's right on one of my meaty main meat on the bone topics for my kind of, be all end all looking back at the 2021 class. It is not crazy, especially to think about the way Georgia recruits and sells itself so well. It is not crazy to think about Georgia's likely defensive back class to have Dejon Nugget Warren, Terrion Arnold, James Williams, Tony Grimes, and then Nyland Green, and that's how you catch. That's how you catch the folks that Georgia's trying to catch. You get guys like that, which would be the defensive back recruiting equivalent of maybe what Alabama did in 2017 with DeMonta Smith and Jerry Jeudy and all the Henry Ruggs, all those huge household names right now, millionaire NFL wide receivers.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I want to ask you something, but you go and finish your point, then I want to ask you a question.
I mean, here's what Georgia does so well. They sell itself. They get face-to-face, and they form a bond. You form an impression. That's Kirby Smart's maybe greatest asset, his personality as a Georgia football coach. And yet you don't get that. It's almost like you had kryptonite handcuffs on the Georgia Superman recruiting machine this year. And they couldn't do what Georgia does all year in and year out. Like you look at this class and you feel like it comes up short in a lot of areas. And even though it's the number three recruiting class in the country as of right now, Georgia just doesn't look at position groups. Remember that 2017 class where they take 7 defensive backs? This was a year, especially the attrition, where it was all set up. A little minor story that I don't think I'm sharing out of pocket here is that, the folks around Tony Grimes told me that, man, if Tony Grimes takes 2 visits, not 6, 2 visits to Georgia, if COVID would have opened up, he wouldn't have reclassified. He would have committed to Georgia, and he would be probably a Georgia Bulldog. And man, and and it's funny because you look at that class now and you're like, okay, Javon Bullard, who a guy I think is still going to play really good football, Kamari Lassiter, Nigel Green, and David Daniel. I think that was one of those years where you don't see this in terms of Georgia. Georgia, you may be pushing away from the table and not getting its fillings of all the prospects it probably needed.
So now that we know that the 21 class is done, guys like Terry Arnold didn't end up at Georgia. Jeff, looking back on it now, how big of a deal is it that UGA got prime timed for Nugget Warren? Does Warren's, absence from this class, does it now loom larger, kind of further considering who Georgia didn't get in that defensive back room?
Yeah, that's a very I don't really think. Let me say this the right way here. I don't think Deion Sanders' persuasive powers was 99% of the reason why he didn't end up at Georgia. But for me, I mean, I was thinking. Remember, we were thinking Dejon Nugget Warren needed to be a plug and play DB. He needed to do exactly what DJ Daniel did, and then he doesn't show up, and then Tyreek Stevenson portals out, and all of a sudden it's a hemorrhage in terms of talent for Georgia. And I don't know if they basically replace the coffers or replace the kitchen cabinets with all the groceries they needed at the defensive back spot. I mean, it's funny how things work. I can't really make a case for Georgia to really say they need 2 or 3 offensive linemen this year because there's so many dudes in this offensive line group right now. And, maybe the running back position's the same way, although they're going to go after 2 more in 2022. But like for me, man, that defensive back class, that defensive back group. And, I don't even know, this is kind of a subtopic of what I think Connor said a minute ago is I don't know if it needs to happen graduate transfer, or I don't know if it needs to happen transfer portal with just guys that are off put with their current situations, or even junior colleges. But there's got to be a way Georgia, they've got room now, lots of room now, especially with Matt Landers moving on and some other names that will reveal themselves over the next couple of months. But man, I think they needed two names or 2 experienced bodies there to play defensive back for this 2021 team.
Connor, how about a miss for you? Have you given us one yet? I forgot.
Yeah, I mentioned Tony Grimes a little bit.
Yeah.
Barrett Carter comes to mind as well. I will say, obviously, it was going to be a defensive-heavy class, and we talked a little bit about Brock Bowers earlier. Do you know this is the first recruiting class that Kirby Smart has assigned where there is not a top 100 either running back or wide receiver in the class?
That's interesting.
I do find that a little interesting, and just given, obviously they signed 5 wide receivers last year. They do have a glut at running back this year with both Zamir and James Cook coming back, but I don't know how many people would have actually predicted that back in, April, May, June, when the hay in this class was really being made. So it is interesting, the skill players, and yes, they've signed well there. But if anything, I think spinning it forward to 2022, I think given what they did at skill position players in this class, I think that puts a real emphasis on who they have to sign there. And they have to get difference makers at the wide receiver and running back positions in 2022.
Let me put on my serious face and my serious voice here for a moment, because I want to talk about a national trend here for a moment, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of fascinated by this. That at one point in time, SEC homerish blowhards like me would have been going shopping for every player who plays west of the Colorado River and just assuming that Georgia was going to get their pick of the litter from everybody off the West Coast, because everybody on the West Coast was leaving to come east, specifically come south. It's kind of interesting how that kind of really didn't happen. Oregon finished with a very strong class. Mm-hmm. USC finished with a very strong class, including adding someone like Corey Foreman, who we talked about a lot, connected to Georgia there for a while. I think it'll be interesting to see if this can continue, both in terms of just the overall climate around, the West Coast area, but for a USC program in particular that has been down and has allowed guys, you might say, a Kendall Milton, you might say, there's a number of names you might mention that are in Georgia's, on Georgia's radar because of some issues at USC. I wonder if those recruiting issues for USC are going away, because hard not to notice you had a couple of Pac-12 schools that actually finished the 2021 cycle recruiting pretty well that, Corey Foreman was a guy at one point in time I think we thought Georgia might have a chance with, but that just kind of came and went with a whimper.
Yeah, as our resident Pac-12 expert here, Oregon is still going to do what Oregon does, but I feel like this class they sign right now is sort of their ceiling, unless they really make strides in the college football playoff. And I think they're sort of hitting their ceiling as a top 6-7 class. really with
That's
the West
not a bad
Coast,
place to be, though. I mean, especially in comparison to who you're playing most Saturdays.
It just for the West Coast and California, it just comes down to USC. I think they did some things offensively this year. They won some more games. I think that really helped. I think if they went like 3-3 and lost some of those one-score games they played in, it's a different type of season for USC. And maybe Clay Helton's looking for another job. Quite frankly, as long as Clay Helton is the head coach at USC, it's not going to be this every single year where you're just not going into Southern California and getting the best players anymore because USC is going to lock them down. As long as I think Helton is there and he's not a dynamo recruiter, even though they've tried to shore up that class there, it's going to be something that sort of moves and changes what I think how USC does over the course of the year. And if USC struggles next season and next year, they really need to have a good year with Keaton Slovis being a draft eligible junior. If he struggles next year, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if Los Angeles is open up again and it's free range for a lot of these teams east of the Mississippi.
It's Cover 4 Live. My name is Brandon Adams. Happy to have Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel here. Mike Griffith, he's taking a couple of days off. He'll be back with us the next time we do Cover 4 Live. So have no fear. Mike will be back soon, just not with us tonight. Let's move on and address topic number 2 here for a moment. Jeff and I kind of got into a little bit of a pickup intramural version of this topic a moment ago. So let's do it for real now. You know, on the heels of Georgia adding Bear Alexander as a really phenomenal addition to the 2022 class and great timing on that, kind of right as the 2021 cycle is coming to an end. I can say this, Jeff, without, I think, hyperbole, I think without any kind of sarcasm whatsoever, I think that Trey Scott's Georgia's best recruiter among its assistant coaches right now.
You know, and first of all, give me some framing. Do you look at it as what have you done for me lately type evaluation? You go 18 months on how you feel that guy's the best, or you need at least a 2-3 year body of work for that? Because I mean, let's look at this very, very. I mean, Matt Luke looks like he's Larry Bird circa 1988 from the 3-point contest in terms. I think Matt Luke is something like 7 for 9 right now in terms of the guys he wants, but it's not as enticing or as amazing. I think you look all around the thing, and you know, Jamil Adai, obviously that's an incomplete. That's a nothing on his grade sheet right now. You look at Schumann. Schumann went 2 for 2 with the guys he really had to have, and the key identifiers. Maybe 2 for 3. I'm gonna throw Barrett Carter in there.
You got to say 2 for 3. I mean, listen, Schumann did a great job again, but it's definitely 2 for 3. It's not. He didn't bat 1,000 on the on his inside linebackers.
Yeah, definitely 2 for 3. But then again, he should have had fertile soil to bring in an inside linebacker after not getting anybody in the 2020 class as well. Georgia in linebackers, Georgia in interior defensive linemen. I think Jonathan Jefferson is a guy maybe we probably should have mentioned as well as a feather in Trey Scott's hat as well. Some of the most astute high school football coaches in Georgia say they've never seen a big man that's 285 pounds and up move so quickly off the ball as Jonathan Jefferson did. You know, we try to give you these little bitty quips at the water cooler. Remember, folks, if you haven't read it yet on Dog Nation, Jonathan Jefferson's dad fought Vitaly Klitschko for the WBO heavyweight championship. And so anytime you can get a defensive football player whose dad fought for the belts that Don King used to brag about all the time, that's a worthy feat. You still got to say Dell a little bit there. Quietly,
I think Dell McGee right now, listen, I'm going to be very careful how I say this. I'm going to be very, very careful how I say this. I think Dell McGee's recent track record in recruiting is certainly worth further examination.
I disagree.
I mean, Dell's key on a lot of guys. Like Dell was key on, you know, he doesn't recruit running backs. He recruits guys at different positions. I think Dell basically owns like most of Metro Atlanta in terms of the guys he goes after. Mm-hmm. The other name you got to think about, and I know he only gets basically 1 or 2 shots a year. And I don't know how hard we're going to grade Todd Hartley, but you're going to call him 1 for 3 in the 2020 class with Theo Johnson and Eric Gilbert, but he gets Darnell Washington. And then
his boss put him in handcuffs on that.
He's not letting him shoot outside, right? Is that
no, his boss had him in handcuffs on that. So let me just make sure I clarify the record on a couple of things. The one thing about Dell McGee's guys is you can't say that any of the guys he brought in can't play, to use a double negative. But it's definitely been a while on that, you know, that top level guy, right? I mean, I'll obviously count Kendall Milton as one of those, so it hasn't been that long, I guess. But, you know, some of the other guys have been brought in. don't necessarily have the same kind of credentials as, like, say, the two guys that signed in the 2018 class as a for instance on that. But no one's going to say Kenny McIntosh can't play the game, and no one's going to say that even Dejon Edwards in the flashes that he got a chance to show that he can't play the game to once again use double negative. But it is kind of interesting, certainly Dell has trusted his own evaluations lately. I'll kind of say that way. And as far as the comparison goes between Matt Luke, who has undoubtedly done a sensational job, and Trey Scott, to be fair here, Georgia's going to recruit more offensive linemen than it's going to recruit interior defensive linemen. And to be fair, I know this is not quite what the topic was about, but I'm going to add this in there. I'd say Georgia's defensive line outperformed its offensive line on the field this past season. And so I'm going to give a nod to Trey Scott for that as well, for not just who he's brought in, but how he's developed that talent enough to be great against the run the last couple of years. And for what it's worth, Georgia's pass rush was much better this year, even if it was outside linebackers who were doing that. You got to give a little credit to the defensive line for making that possible. So that's part of my argument. If Trey Scott, I already tell Connor disagrees.
So, one, I will defend Del McGee first, even though I believe right now he is not my answer. Del McGee, do we give him credit for Zach Evans since he did get a signed letter of intent from Mr. Evans?
Revisionist Brandon, come on, you got it. Come on, man.
First of all, there's no need to defend Del McGee because I did not criticize Del McGee. So don't try to paint me in a corner. Don't try to paint me in a corner on this. I was very careful with my word choice. I'll be really interested to see what Del does in this 2021 cycle and who he goes out and signs. Yeah, 22.
Based on 2022, excuse me, years and whatnot. Because I did a quick scroll through the 247 top running backs today. It does not appear to be a deep running back class, certainly not what it was 2 years ago when Kendall Milton was signed. So I'll be sort of interested to see if he can land Emmanuel Henderson, the number one running back out of Alabama, or number one running back in the country right now. Jeff mentioned a lot of great names. Todd Hartley, I think, has done a really good job. And if he can land Oscar Delp in this cycle, again, that's another big win. I know we don't really talk about him much as a recruiter. Todd Monken, since he has been hired, has landed Brock Vandegrift, JT Daniels, and Gunnar Stockton. And that's a pretty impressive 3 for 3, especially when, you mentioned your boss hamstringing you. This Georgia offense was a really big unknown in what it might look like. So for, I think, Monken to come out, convince these high-profile quarterbacks that Georgia is a place that can develop you, and also somewhat do that on the field in 2021 or 2020. Again, I'm getting years all mixed up left and right now, but I think Monken deserves some credit for the recruiting that he has done in terms of bringing in these top-name quarterbacks.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. Jeff, I know that Gunnar Stockton has told you about the value that he kind of saw in the Todd Monken offense, even kind of put some of that stuff on social media. What would the Vandegrift family say about their feelings about Todd Monken? Because I do remember when Vandegrift first announced his Georgia pledge, it was actually the hometown pull that was really pretty instrumental for him. But, as he grew more acquainted with the situation at Georgia, and at one point in time, Vandegrift was actually very open to say that maybe the best football situation was at Oklahoma, and who, would disagree with that, just given how they'd been throwing the ball all over the yard. How do you think his relationship with Monken has evolved since becoming a Georgia pledge?
I think it's a lot of trust there. They enabled him, and they kind of deputized him to be the face-to-face liaison for Georgia football's recruiting class with all those no-contact visits. Connor, I don't know if your therapist has told you to avoid all references to Jamie Newman, but man, you got to throw Newman in there as well. That's another guy that somehow came to Georgia as well, based on the ability.
Technically, Newman was here before Monken was hired. Right. Technically,
that's a huge misnomer. We know Georgia football right now. The announcement of Will Muschamp this week, we all know that was percolating maybe December the 18th, December the 14th, or whatever. So technically, you are correct, Connor, in a lot of ways. But here's another name. I'm gonna come back to Hartley a little bit, because he has, like Brandon said, he's not allowed to drift outside the paint. He can only shoot 12-foot jumpers or whatever. But think about this. I mean, really, Georgia would have been happy with Gilbert, Washington, or Theo in the 2020 cycle. They get Washington. Now look at 2021. They get Bowers. That was the number one alpha target as well. 2022, I can't imagine Georgia being in any better shape right now than they are right now for Oscar Delp. And then they get 2023. They got Pierce Sperling III. Brandon, that's like you sitting down on a Friday in your cocktail hour, your happy hour, or whatever, and you sit there and
Which
I've
begins
already got
about 1 p.m. on a Friday.
that's you sitting there going with your lovely bride and family. You're going, all right, I got my next 5 shows already figured out, and they're great shows. That's kind of the way Todd Hartley's recruiting right now, and I'm gonna give you a little bit of nugget. I think, Brandon, I want to mail you a box of Crow, and I want you to open that up after signing day 2022, and you might want to reevaluate how you feel about Dell McGee after the 22 signing class comes in.
First of all, I've got nothing to reevaluate.
No.
I've been nothing but complimentary. But I do think, listen, I've been on this now for a while that Georgia needs. I don't think anyone questions the idea that Kendall Milton has a chance to be an elite running back. I think finding that elite running back of the future to go along with him has been something that Georgia's been trying to do now for a couple of years. And maybe that guy's on the roster. Maybe that's what Lavassier Carroll's going to turn out to be. Or maybe it happens here in the 2022 class. But this is not something that's kind of a Johnny-come-lately topic. Georgia has had, I say, running back as a position of need now for a couple of years. As I said before, McGee's been content to trust his own evaluation with these players. And thus far, you don't have a lot to squabble with when it comes to that kind of stuff. But pairing that next elite back to go with what I think Milton's going to be able to do is still a pretty significant storyline.
I will say Mike Griffith is watching this somewhere, screaming at his bulldog, Kenny McIntosh, just to put that name out there because we haven't said it quite yet tonight. Go ahead, Jeff.
Connor, I want you to catch my 6 on this one. Let me be sure I quote Brandon's sentiment accurately. So what Brandon has been saying is that Dale McGee's 900-foot Titan reputation as a recruiter has leveled off to around 750 feet. And all we're saying is that reputation is going to go back up to 900 feet in terms of he's going to be one of the alpha ace guys on the staff, which is what he started out the gate during his time at Georgia.
Yeah, I think that would be fun to see. Now, as far as Todd Hartley goes, I think the reason why Hartley ends up not ranking higher on lists like this is because of his own, I'd say, attempts to set the bar maybe a little higher than it needed to be. Back to the class of 2020, he was all the time tweeting out those like Jordan Pippen, Stockton Malone, Kobe Shaq. He was always doing like the tandem thing when it came to those guys, obviously setting up Georgia fans to get a Darnell and a Rick, or a Darnell and a Theo Johnson. He was kind of always setting up, that expectation in the mind of Georgia fans. So he's really, as you said, done exceptionally well. I just think that, he sort of established a baseline level of greed for a lot of UGA fans with the thought that Georgia might go after a kind of a double dip on those tight ends back for the class of 2020. Any other assistants you want to mention here?
I mean, we didn't say Dan Lanning's name, but I think talking about him as a recruiter at this point, like obviously he's done a great job there, but I just think it's so clear that, and again, I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but he seems like a guy who's destined for a head coaching job. He could possibly even get it for UCF, though. If I had to bet, they're going to go an offensive guy there at UCF because that's just sort of what their program is. It feels like 2021 is going to be Dan Lanning's last year at Georgia, and he's just destined to be a head coach somewhere next year. Because while, yes, the Georgia defense, I guess, didn't live up to the hype, it still led the country in rush defense and still led the SEC in yards per play allowed. So there were still some really good things being done there. They're going to have 2 cornerbacks taken in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. They're going to have Azeez Ojulari, who was of the outside linebacker prospects he signed, was a lower-ranked prospect, going to be a first-round draft pick. I think he's done a lot of really impressive things. And obviously his reputation as a recruiter speaks for itself, but I think the reason maybe his name didn't come up was just because we all kind of know here he's not for long at Georgia anymore.
Here's the other thing too, Jeff. You look at last year's national champion. Alabama fans didn't like Pete Golding, but Golding gave them some continuity at defense. They also had the same offensive coordinator. That's a national championship. Obviously, I've talked a ton about Joe Brady in 2019 for LSU, but there was also continuity with what's his name, who's at Baylor now, and what is his name?
Dave Aranda.
Yeah,
Dave Aranda.
And Steve Ensminger had been there. Prior to Joe Brady, there was some continuity there. Obviously, Clemson had continuity with its coordinators, for a pretty good bit of time. I mean, I think the biggest thing to happen for Georgia thus far this offseason, and it doesn't seem all that sexy, it's not necessarily all that exciting, but I do think it was a very big deal that Georgia was able to hold on to Dan Lanning. And I say that knowing full well that this was not a stellar statistical year for the Georgia defense, but I do think in the pursuit of a national championship, I think continuity is a fairly big component on that with your two key coordinator spots. I think Lanning coming back for Georgia was really huge.
Hopefully I'm not channeling the spirit of Mike Griffith here as I say this, but Brandon, I want to give another little bullet point on the Lanning resume in terms of a recruiter. I was having conversations with Big Bear Alexander. We got to make sure we get the correct condenser.
The Bear or Big Bear?
Big Bear. It's
I
Big
like
Bear
Alexander.
Alexander.
I like just Bear better.
Big Bear. That's kind of like, bigger, better, whatever. I was talking to him and I was talking to Bear, and Bear, this was like October, November last year, and he was pouring honey into my ears about Georgia. And I was sitting to myself and I was saying, wow, this kid really might show up at Georgia, even though he's from Texas. This really sounds like a kid that's falling in love with Georgia. And I've heard that about 97 times over the last 4 years. The first name out of his mouth was not Travion Scott, was not Trey Scott. The first name out of his mouth in terms of guys recruiting him well and doing a great job recruiting him, that was Dan Lanning, recruiting Big Bear Alexander, who is a nasty looking prospect in the 2022 class. And I mean nasty, kind of the way those old school NBA play-by-plays with Marv Albert would talk about a nasty jumper from the outside or a nasty sharpshooter from the outside. Big Bear Alexander, we need to cover this at some point in the show. He's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 rated players in the Georgia class when all is said and done.
Very interesting. Let's move on here. Topic number 3 on Cover 4 Live. Got Connor Raleigh, Jeff Sintel, myself, Brandon Adams. No Mike Griffith tonight, but Mike will be back with us again next time. So a lot of Georgia fans look at what's happening just to the west here in Tuscaloosa. Arguably, not even arguably, I think measurably, the greatest signing class of all time. It's been called head-to-head win to punctuate that with Terry and Arnold choosing the Crimson Tide over UGA. And you're kind of left with the question of, is there anything that can be done to thwart the Alabama recruiting momentum that also seems to bleed over into on-field momentum? Bama's the reigning national champion after all. So, Connor, other than the easy answer of finding a way to beat them in December, as a lead up to that, or as we're waiting for that to maybe happen, what else can Georgia do to potentially thwart this Alabama momentum?
So the obvious answer is December 4th in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. Beat them. It's the simple. That is when the SEC championship is going to be played next year. That is the simplest answer. They have to show that they can beat them, and that thus Georgia's a program that can get to the college football playoff and win national titles. But I think there's some other things that they've done, and they just sort of need to continue to do. I think Azeez Ojulari and possibly Tyson Campbell going in the first round in the NFL draft would go a long way in helping how Georgia recruits and develops talent. I think this going into even this next season, even before they see Alabama, George Pickens developing into the best receiver in college football or a potential first-round draft pick. Nolan Smith sort of following in Azeez Ojulari's shoes. I think if Georgia can continue to build out the NFL draft pipeline to where they're going from, all right now they're having at least one guy every year with a first-round draft pick, maybe 2. If they can do that every year to where they turn it to they have 3 or 4 guys who are no doubt about it first-round picks every year, I think that goes a long way in making up some of these recruiting deficits that just exist right now. And again, it's a one-class sample size, but Alabama's not going anywhere. And I think Georgia, if they continue to produce NFL draft talent that goes high first round, high second round, I think that's going to make things a little bit easier to sell.
Jeff, I think Connor's answers there are extraordinary. I think that's exactly right. That, in the leaked Zoom video that everybody's been talking about from Nick Saban, his own player development is something that he touted there. And I think it's important to note that he's touting a body of work that stretches back to 2007, whereas Kirby Smart is only going into year 6 at Georgia. He hasn't had as many players yet in the pipeline. But this could be the draft cycle where all of this turns. If Azeez does get taken in the first round, if Campbell makes his way into that first 32 picks, all of a sudden now, through 6 years of work, Georgia starts to have a little bit of draft capital that looks right there on par with anybody. And if you want to sell Georgia as the business decision, boy, this April could certainly make that easier. And the guys on the field this upcoming fall who could do that the following spring, I think Connor's just about dead on when he says that, Jeff.
Well, I think a lot of talking heads like us are talking blue check marks, as Brandon likes to say all the time.
I'm a man of the people. I don't have a blue check. I have a blue collar mentality, lunch pail,
Sure.
Show up. I do the little things and get dirty.
Might have a white collar taste with some things, though.
I'm going to let that comfortable laughter echo for about one more second. So here's what I think, Brandon. And I think it's about, everybody's going to say this is a key year. This is a crucial year. Here's where I think it really resonates is they're going to start letting kids come back on campus around May, June. Maybe that's the timeline. And Georgia's going to be able to show them palatial facilities. They're going to be, I've heard recruits already getting virtual Zooms about it. They're seeing everything. They say Georgia, Bama. So first of all, it needs to be a renaissance where Georgia's recruiters get to be face-to-face with these kids. And as you always like to say, they got dangling keys. They got really cool, shiny new toys to show. They got new stuff to sell.
At Alabama, they literally may have dangling keys.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
Dodge Chargers. And then you've got, the Todd Monken offense. That's a dangling key. Throwing deep, that's a dangling key. The new facilities, the new weight room, the new everything. They're going to have all that. But for me, and it's not just the names Connor mentioned. For me, this is a transcendent leap year for Georgia football. And what I mean by this is if they're going to make the college football playoff or not, that's the leap I think they need to take. And their names, they are primed to explode. I'm talking about Nolan Smith, Adam Anderson, Trayvon Walker, Keely Ringo. They are names that Arian Smith. These are names, Kendall Milton, Broderick Jones. These are names, Cedric Von Prawn. N'Kobe Dean's got to take another gear. Are we going to see it from Channing Tindall or Quay Walker? These are names where Georgia's guys have to make a leap from flashes, got some potential. Remember, folks were talking about Trayvon Walker as a top 10 overall NFL pick when he came to Georgia. Saw that flash his first year, had some injuries his second year, and a weird year for a lot of people and a lot of reasons. But if all those names pop and all those names hit as to where they were supposed to hit, then you've got Georgia with the ability, and it's a much more complex equation than saying to be the Bama, you got to beat the Bama. And I probably should have some Ric Flair dialect around that. But that's the thing. The only way Georgia's going to catch Alabama is they got to beat Alabama on the field. But that's an easy thing to say. You've got to have the pieces that have been recruited that are in place. That simply, it is their shining moment. It is their time to shine. And they've got to play like the potential that they signed on the dotted line when they came to Georgia. If that doesn't happen, Brandon, it's going to be another kick the dog type year come December.
So
we do not kick dogs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean.
Let me just throw this out there as
the ceramic dog.
There you go.
As a little bit of a pushback to the notion that to be the man, you have to beat the man, the way that Ric Flair once said and Jeff Sintel just said. Alabama's only won the SEC West in 2 of the last 4 years. They've only beaten their in-state rival in 2 of the last 4 years. When Georgia won the SEC in 2017, Alabama was nowhere to be found. That part of the recipe of Georgia making the college football playoff this year, if it does, could possibly involve someone doing Georgia's dirty work for them, beating Alabama, preventing Alabama from getting the SEC championship. When Bama's on top in the college football world, it almost becomes hard to remember a time when they weren't on top in the college football world. But you don't have to look any further to just 1 year ago to find a time in which not only were they not the national champions, they weren't in the SEC championship game. 2 years before that, also not in the SEC championship game. Georgia hasn't found the formula yet for beating Alabama. Maybe that changes come December. But there are plenty of other teams in the SEC West, or at least a few teams in the SEC West, who have found that formula. Who knows? Maybe somebody takes care of Bama, and maybe Georgia's facing, if Georgia wins the SEC East, maybe Georgia's facing someone else in Atlanta come December, and all of a sudden that path towards the college football playoff maybe seems a little easier at that point.
So, BA, I see your point, and there are a lot of valid ones in there. And I do think, if that's the case, that the situation laid out, let's say, I think Texas A&M is probably the second best team in the SEC West next year. Let's say they do Georgia's bidding for them. And, that's going to answer a lot of questions in terms of the validity of Georgia year in, year out. But I just think with where these two programs are, with the shared history that they have, with both Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, with just the struggles that this program has had against Alabama, I do think that Georgia at some point, to really make that statement, they have to actually go out and beat Alabama specifically. On a 1 year sample, sure, yes, you are correct. But I think for Georgia to be the Death Star that everyone seems to think it is capable of being, and I think we all agree it is capable of that without the weird flat cap that allows it to get blown up twice. I think Georgia actually has to go out there and beat Alabama on the field to make that definitive statement.
Yeah, since you referenced Star Wars, I'll reference Star Wars 2, Episode 6. Luke wants to find out how he can be a Jedi. You got Yoda saying, Vader, you must defeat Vader. So I guess to earn full Jedi status, maybe Kirby Smart has to go out there and vanquish his old mentor as well when it comes to Nick Saban. The other thing, Jeff, on this topic is I'll say is this, is that, and this is going to sound like excuses, but I don't care what people think. If there were visits this year, if there were opportunities to craft authentic personal connections with recruits, I feel pretty confident saying that Alabama does not sign the greatest class of all time. I mean, you could tell me more about the individual names. I can think of a couple that Georgia might have even been able to pick off of this Alabama signing class had Georgia been able to do what it typically does, which is roll out the red carpet and be really good at the face-to-face communication. Frankly, the fact that Georgia signed this class that was as highly rated as it was with a pretty important club taken out of Kirby Smart's bag in terms of being able to host those visitors, I think speaks pretty well for Georgia. I'm not going to diminish the Alabama class, but I think the circumstances helped Alabama. And by the way, we predicted this. We said in the pandemic world, the teams that were buttoned up and professional would be even better. The teams that didn't have the ducks in a row would be even worse. And pretty much that's the way the SEC turned out to be this year. So in a non-pandemic world, Georgia recruits better. I think Alabama probably doesn't look quite as strong as it looks at the end of this 2021 cycle.
I think quite as strong is the right place to start here. I think both of you guys had excellent points and offertory statements on this stuff. All I know is this, man. Alabama found another gear. They elevated the pace of their dynasty with this season. They did it with losing, what they have, 4 first-rounders that they lost. I think that's correct. And they found more giddy up in their stride. They vanquished everybody in their way. All SEC season, they had Mac Jones just kind of sitting in their back like it was some newfangled ping hybrid that can get you within 5 feet of the pin every time you swing it. The club that was out of Kirby Smart's bag this year was his putter, because that's how well Georgia closes. I mean, this is what I think of, Brandon, and this is my industry. This is my lane. I thought the greatest recruiting class that I've ever seen on paper, and then how they produced on the field, was the 2017 recruiting class for Alabama. That was a little bit better than Georgia. And now they've one up that. Maybe they've even two up that, where I sit there and look at the guys that Georgia did get. Like, it makes me wonder, how did Georgia hold off Bama for Amarius Mims? Because Alabama thought they were getting 3 5-stars out of the state of Texas. You got Texas down. You got, all these things these spheres of influence kind of intersect a little bit. But you think about this, and you think about Bama with another wide receiver haul that on paper, as far as the rankings go, that's as good as the 2017 haul. You think about a guy like Dallas Turner. Mm-hmm. That's a name that if Georgia could have gotten a couple more in-house visits. You think about Terry and Arnold.
Let me just say this. Turner was definitely one of the names on my list of a guy that I just think Georgia could have swayed if they had a chance to host him.
Certainly could have had a puncher's chance there, but you look at all that stuff and you go, hold on a second. Bama was clearly better. And I know everybody's going to say this, they led at halftime. I'm not a fan of that. And the 4th-string quarterback, the walk-on quarterback, not a fan of that argument.
Yeah, they led at halftime the last 3 times they played. I'm tired of hearing about halftime leads.
Yeah, maybe a halftime lead for Terry and Arnold. Obviously, we can say that as well. But the thing here, man, Bama got better when they were already better. And that's going to be very hard. I think the whole country, we talk about guys that need to hit, guys that need to pop. There's a lot of guys. I think the number, what is it, Connor? 15 out of the top 91. They got 7 5-stars. That's exactly what Georgia did. Now, in 2018, we saw what can happen when a 5-star goes here, a 5-star goes there. This guy wasn't as good as everybody thought he was. This guy has a knee injury. Football happens. Life happens. But to think about Bama having a certain brand of groceries in the cupboards and then going out and getting even better groceries in the cupboards, that kind of shows you the tall order ahead for Georgia and playing catch up here.
We got some good comments in the comment section. I want to get to those in a moment and I'll cover more. Before that, though, let's do one more topic here as a part of our cover 4. We are now officially in the throes of the 2022 class. Georgia got a big 2022 commitment this week, got a huge one last week. You got the month of March looming with some very big names getting ready to drop their decisions. Let's talk, though, here storylines when it comes to what's going to matter most for the class of 2022. Connor, my thing is in reference to something you mentioned a moment ago, the absence of the top 100 running back, the absence of the top 100 receiver from the 2021 class. And the receiver thing is to be expected because Georgia signed so many receivers for its 2020 class that was less of a position of need this time around. But with Stockton in place, with a lineage of quarterbacks now in place for Georgia, you hope the Kojo Antwees of the world and the folks like that are paying close attention to this to see what Georgia does those skill positions after a relatively quiet 21 cycle when it comes to the skill positions. I think that's, to me, there's no bigger storyline for Georgia than that.
Yeah, and to me, that's right now the biggest win that Stockton represents for Georgia is he's going to make it so much easier to get a guy like Kojo Antwees, who Georgia's battling Ohio State for, a guy like Oscar Delp, a guy like Delian Morissette, I believe, if I butchered his name there, I'm sorry.
Denilan.
Thank you. Those types of guys who, Alabama's after Morissette. Delp has offers from every major program in the country. Ohio State wants Antwees. Having a guy like Gunnar Stockton, and I think having all those guys in the state of Georgia, I think one of the things that we saw with this pandemic was Georgia's had to focus more on recruiting the state of Georgia and doing a better job of that because they weren't able to host national visits. And one of the things, I've got a story on this coming tomorrow. Do you know how many commitments there were on National Signing Day 2020 for the 2021 class?
How many is that?
3, and it was very quickly 2 because Jared Wilson believed decommitted 2 or 3 days after the fact.
Okay.
The year before, on 2019 signing day, there were 3 commitments for the 2020 class. Georgia has 8 right now. They are much further ahead in where
Very
they are.
Interesting.
Part of the reason for that is in-state guys. They got a lot of in-state guys to commit early and play well, and I think really help out and solidify that class. And that's something you've seen Ohio State, Clemson as well do going forward. So I think if Georgia's able to continue to recruit the state of Georgia well, because it's always a loaded class, and I know Jeff has some guys that I haven't even mentioned yet that he wants me to get to. I think if they can do that and then see how they manage that with the visits opening up, because I think that's going to potentially lead to some decommitment just because guys are going out again, they're seeing other schools or seeing other places. But you hit it on the head. I think those skill player guys, Morissette, Antwees, and Delp are must gets for Georgia in this class.
Jeff, how about your big storyline to watch for 2022?
Well, we kind of hit on the right tones. I think you look at last cycle, and Georgia really didn't. First of all, you look at pure offers. Georgia only offered 10 quarterbacks. Georgia only offered 14 running backs. That's counting pro style, dual threat. That's counting all purpose backs or whatever. Very selective in terms of those. And I think that's what they're going to do here. I think they need to go. I think maybe the most encouraging thing out of what Connor said there is the fact that Georgia is in a boat race right now with Ohio State for a guy that Ohio State wants.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we put the video up last night on Before the Hedges. I mean, Kojo Antwees is a great interview, a great communicator, but you could clearly tell no one that saw him and saw his faces, Brad. I know how you like to look through quotes with that little magnifying glass and figure out what's exactly there. I mean, you could just read the gushing on Kojo Antwees' face, talking about Gunnar Stockton. He thinks Gunnar Stockton is the best quarterback in the country. He's going to Georgia. He thought he was going to Auburn. Gunnar calls him before and after, the same thing he did with Denilan Morissette. And Morissette, you got an Alabama battle there. I know everybody's tired of hearing that. But you've got Georgia, where I think maybe they did not get everything they needed in the skill positions, wide receiver, that they got in 2021. And let's say this really fast. We mentioned a lot of names in terms of Georgia's best recruiter. The name we did not mention, fair or unfair, was Cortez Hankton. Georgia needs to make sure they get not just the homeschool Kojo Antwees, not just the home state Kojo Antwees, not just the Denilan Morissette, but maybe that's A.J. Johnson out there in New Orleans. That's Arch Manning's number one target.
Boy, what happened with him this week? There have been all kinds of chatter about him. What happened?
Just pump the brakes. I mean, it happens all the time. He was ready to make a commitment, and then he wasn't. Georgia and LSU were the schools there. A.J. Johnson is a Snellville
these Louisiana
native.
recruitments, man. There's always something going on. There's always something going on.
Come on, Brandon. It's what it is, man. The more things change,
there's always something going on when you get involved down there in sportsman's paradise.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. I'm going to ask you this, Brandon. You probably feel better about Georgia holding on to a Texas recruit than they do ever holding on to a Louisiana recruit.
Them A&M message boards, man, they're fired up over this Bear Alexander thing. I think battle lines have been drawn over Bear Alexander. Some of these message boards are already pretty mid-season form on some of this recruiting stuff. Those A&M people are fired up over Bear Alexander.
The other name out of Texas in a wide receiver spot, I think Georgia needs to go national or at least deep south, stay deep south, is this guy's name is Brennan Thompson, Brandon, and he has clocked a 10.18 before the track season of his junior year. Folks, Arian Smith didn't run that fast. Miko Hardman didn't run that fast. Nick Chubb didn't run that fast. Keely Ringo didn't run that fast. Tyson Campbell didn't run that fast. Maybe Matthew Bowling ran that fast. That's about the only guy Georgia has targeted in the athletic realm that runs as fast as Brendan Thompson. He's got Clemson. He's got Oklahoma. He's got Texas. He's got Texas A&M. He's got Georgia as well there as well. Georgia needs to get that scary, crazy fast football player in every cycle. And it's not this guy, he looks good, he's underrated, and he's really got a lot of pieces we can put together. How many times have we heard this with Georgia wide receivers, fair or unfair? We can go down the list. We don't have to drag people's names through the mud, but there are very few names. Like we were having a conversation a minute ago. If you want to think about Georgia receivers that have hit, you can say Kyrus Johnson after this year, Kyrus Jackson, excuse me. Sorry about that, King Kyrus. And then you have to start thinking Blaylock and Pickens. But prior to that, and then Jermaine Burton last year, prior to that, there's a lot of guys that were off target with their evaluations. And bringing them in and thinking that this is one of my big pet peeves, Brandon. If a guy is not the dude and the alpha and the guy making the band play 3 times a night on Friday night, he's just not going to figure that out in the SEC his freshman year or sophomore year in the toughest conference in the country.
Yeah, don't get me started on these coaches lying to these recruits about basketball and everything else. Connor, go ahead.
I was just going to say, we're talking about skill players here, and we haven't made a really bad pun tonight, so I feel obligated to be the one to take it. Jeff, would you agree that Denylin Morissette is a name you ought to know for the 2022 recruiting class?
Yeah, I would say, no, man. I mean, that's a jagged little pill you're bringing up right now, man.
It's ironic.
It's ironic.
On your wedding day.
All right, what do you say we do this? What do you say we move on from our cover 4 now to a punless version of our cover more, where we'll take some questions and comments for a couple of minutes here anyway before we get ready to wrap things up today. Doug Mangus on the idea of McCole Hardman. I hear some of the sharps talking about McCole being a pretty good play for some of the prop bets for the weekend. It seems like there's some action on McCole right now.
Over on the longest play from him, I think would be a heady play. Of course, didn't have a great Super Bowl last year. Kirby Smart was asked who he's rooting for in the Super Bowl on Wednesday.
Almost a misstep, by the way. A misstep. He almost said, "I just want to see a close game," without referencing the fact that he's got a big-time player in this game. A rare PR misstep for Smart, not saying that he's rooting for the Chiefs, I thought.
Okay, y'all. I got to say this. Let's talk about really quickly the enchanted life of McCole Hardman for a second. So he goes through his Georgia career, plays for an SEC title, plays for a national title. Brandon, it was February this week of 2016 when he chose Georgia. He ran through the banner. Since then, this fella has played in a national championship game, SEC championship game. He's gotten picked in the second round. He's won a Super Bowl, and now he's going to his second Super Bowl. I mean, besides his flashy pregame attire, I mean, that is living the dream for a young man straight out of Bowman, Georgia.
No, it's good stuff. But if you're Kirby, you got to say you're rooting for him in the press conference, right, Connor?
So I think Kirby slyly said, his kids are rooting for McCole, and that's been something referenced before, but he's also really good friends with Bruce Arians. I believe plays in his golf tournament every year. So you don't want to – and as great as McCole is, Bruce Arians is a decision maker. You got someone who could potentially draft some Georgia Bulldogs to be on an NFL team next year. So I think, I understand you maybe want Kirby to hype up McCole a little bit more. I think Kirby made the smart political play to play it both down the middle for McCole and Bruce Arians there.
I think that's probably a pretty good point. Somebody in the YouTube comment section a moment ago, DMart42 taking a little bit of a jab at me. That's kind of funny. Somebody mentioned G-Day earlier. How you guys feel? I know Kirby Smart talked about the mid-April date for that. How you guys feel about the possibility we get fans in the stands for G-Day?
I definitely think we'll be able to get fans in the stands, just given we had them for the college. Given we had him for the college football season last year, and you've been following the numbers a bit, we've seen COVID cases start to go down a little bit, I believe 15% week over week on the 7-day average. So I do think they're going to have a plan in place. I don't know if it's going to be a full stadium. I don't know if it's going to be 50% or what it'll be, but they'll have fans there. I think maybe the thing I'm more interested in is what the NCAA decides to do with its upcoming dead period. It's supposed to end April 15th. The NCAA makes a decision to say, hey, we can go to a quiet period where you can go visit campuses, or they want to go full contact period. I think if they go quiet period there and kids are allowed to visit, I think that's going to make that G-Day, that April 17th day, all the more important from a recruiting perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. Let me slide over here and take a couple of Facebook comments here as well before we get ready to wrap up here today. A lot of folks kind of checking in here to say a lot of different things. People enjoying their top fan status over there. Sam Hazeltine bringing up the 2021 schedule on Facebook. Jeff, I'm still a believer that obviously a huge game against Clemson to kick things off, and everyone has October 30 circled against Florida, but this is a manageable schedule. It's not the reason that Georgia will win a national championship. They've still got to win these games in the field, but it's certainly not a disqualifying reason.
Yeah, it's kind of set up where you don't have the treacherous. I think there'll be some normalcy with all the out-of-conference games, and guys can play and you can get reps, and you can, you always wonder about this past season. And if Georgia would have had the Charleston Southerns or, those schools like that, or UT Martin, if they would have had those, would you have seen a lot of Carson Beck in one of those games? Would you have gotten some more comfort and familiarity for DeJuan Mathis? I think there's a lot of things, and it's probably a 30 for 31 day as we look at these recruiting classes of guys that were probably not good enough to end up where they were, or were way too good to be where they ended up because they didn't get that great evaluation that kind of fell through the cracks. You're going to see a lot of things out of this 2021 recruiting cycle where we go, I'm simply going to say this. I think there are going to be a lot more busts and a lot more guys that show up at a place like, I don't know, Purdue, kind of like Rondale Moore. And all of a sudden you're like, how in the world, or in Indiana, how in the world did that guy wind up there doing those sort of things? I think it's just indicative of the nature of the 2021 affected recruiting cycle.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Connor, last thing, Clarence Dawson over here on Facebook mentions the return of the NCAA football game. How excited are you about that? I feel like in future years, we got to do Cover 4 Live, like a Twitch stream with like the video game thing kind of going here, something along those lines. I've never been a huge gamer, but I have played the game before and enjoyed it. How excited are you to be bringing it back?
I'm very excited. I'm someone who's logged a lot of hours on NCAA 14, and as someone who's been on multiple podcasts to discuss the game, it's a flawed game. It's not perfect, but I don't even so much care about, modern players if I can play as Kendall Milton or JT Daniels. Give me a college football playoff. Give me easier, more increased recruiting focus. Give me just all the things that make college football great, and I will lead Dartmouth to an SEC title. I will lead Akron to a Big 12 title. Whatever it is, I'm just excited that at some point you're in fact going to get this game back.
Jeff, you play this game?
Oh man, I used to play it a lot, get on the sticks back in the day. I'm gonna tell you this, my 12-year-old son, we're talking about it. And Connor, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's only going to be available on the next generation platforms, right? You're going to have to get the Xbox X1 or the PS5, something like that, right? You have to shell out some coin. Yeah. And Brandon, if it's $500 for a system and then it's $70 for the game to get some NCAA football 2022 going, that's just fine. All I want to know, Brandon, is if things continue the way they are until this game comes out, are you going to take a dynasty user-controlled Alabama and just run them into the ground just so you can see what it feels like?
Just so I can have the feeling of destroying from the inside. I'll say this. I played what I think is the original EA Sports college football game, which was back in 1993 or so, was branded Bill Walsh college football. I used to have the Bill Walsh college football for the Sega Genesis. The 92 Georgia, like the two teams are so much fun to play with back then. You had the most recent Georgia team, which was 1992, Zaire, Hurst, Hastings, Shannon Mitchell at tight end. Really fun team to play with. 80 Georgia is kind of one of the all-time classic teams on that. So my relationship with EA Sports College Football goes all the way back to like 1993 with what I think was the first version of the game way back then.
Do you want to know how old you are, BA?
Yeah.
That game came out before I was born.
How about that? That's really something. Really
something. So Brandon, it's pretty funny. I was doing some. I had to do some cleaning in the honeydew list. I'm sure everybody on our channels will understand what that means. But I was going through some boxes, and I saw some old games, and I was going through them, and I found NCAA 14 that was like in a box.
Wow.
And I pulled it out, and I was like, I opened up the jewel case, and it wasn't in there.
Okay.
And I was like,
oh no.
I was like, no. And then I'm going through all the rest of them, and like it's like I found the actual disc in like where it should have been in like I forget, like a Disney movie case or something. Like, you know how kids are, man. You can never.
If you had NCAA 14 and it was still shrink wrapped, like unopened, that's probably worth something, right?
Well, it wasn't it wasn't unopened, but the climax of this story is like I find it. It's inside one of those Lego Batman games, which every kid loved about 10 years ago as well. And I put it in there, and I tweeted out, Brandon. This is a true story. I tweeted out, and I was like, I feel like I just found gold, like something out of One-Eyed Willie in the Goonies. And I sit there and I went, somebody DM me like within 10 minutes, and they said, I will give you $150 cash money right now for that NCAA 14. And I was like, whoa, like that's how crazy it was. I mean, you can't find it anywhere. But somebody, I mean, I was like taking offers, like, and I did not sell it because that thing is still upstairs.
That's good stuff. All right. Well, I'm exhausted. We got to go. I'm already yawning, sitting here talking. Bill
Walsh football.
Bill Walsh college football back in 1993. Connor, good stuff. I'll see Jeff tomorrow on Dog Nation Daily, presented by Kroger. We're looking forward to having a good time with that. Connor Riley's got all kinds of fun stuff coming up on the website over the course of the next couple of days. And listen, we're going to dig our heels into finding out what's next, the 2022 class and spring practice really just around the corner. Crucial days for this Georgia program and everything that it can accomplish in the upcoming year. Thanks for being here. Appreciate your comments, part of Cover More, and appreciate your viewership as part of Cover 4 Live. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll look forward to seeing you again next time.